Before we move to change talk, I want to do one little concrete thing. I mentioned this yesterday, and it's a very subtle little trick, and it's similar to the trick I showed you earlier, where we convert questions into reflections. Here, we're converting praise into reflections. So these are not terrible things to say, okay? These are not going to harm anyone, but we have a different way to construct them, all right? Who would like to guess how, from an MI perspective, we would restate these? Pick out any of these and convert them into a you statement.
You can do it.
Not quite. It's not quite. That's cheerleading. Okay? You're a cheerleader? There we go.
She's for children.
And now, it is not a bad thing. So our experience, and there's actually a whole set of studies, it's probably just innocuous. It's probably just a placebo. So don't worry, but it's better, we feel, to do it the way we're going to show you. So you were close, but there's a little conversion you have to do.
You should be proud of yourself?
Take away should.
Be proud of yourself?
Nope.
Be you proud?
You are proud of yourself.
You are proud.
Do you understand the difference? It's a very subtle distinction. Is you're putting the pride, not your experience of the pride, you're putting it back onto the patient. Are you following this? So this is what they would look like. They're very different. They're not intuitive conversions. It's not nearly as easy, but once you get it, hopefully you'll see the point. This is how MI praises. We affirm the person's effort, the person's reaction to their effort, and the person's competence. But notice the one common thing. You. We're not telling them how to feel. And this is what cheerleading is. Cheerleading is you should be proud. Or you should be so, happy that you didn't get this. Or you should. We don't do it that way. We don't tell them how they should feel. We instead try to reflect on any effort or anything they've done that will increase their confidence. And we reflect it, and it's their experience of it, not yours. First person, third person. All right? Do you see the subtle distinction? Mm-hmm. So in MI, we strongly discourage first person praise and cheerleading. So let's see if we can practice one. From your project, someone come up with a praise statement to one of the kids, and then we're going to convert it to a second person statement. So think about one of the kids that would be in your project, and let's just artificially say it's a second session. I know you don't really have them, but they came back and they threw out all their knives, and they've started meditating instead of fighting.
Oh.
All right?
So effective.
You could praise them. I will praise them. I want you to convert it to a you statement, all right? I'm so happy to hear that you went to the yoga class I recommended and the meditation class, and it's so great that you threw out your weapons. They're not terrible, but we think there's something better. So what's the other way? I think...
You've made a lot of changes since the last time we met.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like you put a lot of thought into behaving differently, trying new things, to really do things differently, to deal with your anger. Even throwing your knives, that must have been a really good step for you.
Mm-hmm. I would probably take off the latter, but it's I don't hate those must-have-beens. We had a little discussion of it while you were dealing with family, but the first part was perfect, literally exactly how we want it. We were reinforcing their effort. In this case, there was actually action, but we're not talking about your response to it now. There's an exception to this rule. Once in a while, we think it's fine to say it's great to hear, or I'm really encouraged to hear that. So we don't want to take that away from your vocabulary. We would like you to think about it as only in extreme situations. So it would have to be a pretty big change for you to get involved. So you have it in your arsenal, but reserve it for when something pretty major has happened. Otherwise, make it about the person, not about you. All right? Any questions about this?
I have a question about.
If you're doing MI, if you feel MI is appropriate, which means they can do the psychological work to talk about their values, and if they can't, then you can't do MI, then first person praise is not applicable. So that's, they carry together. All right, we are ready to do that thing. All right. So now we're finally going to use MI to persuade. So up until this point, we have been using the skills just to understand someone, their resistance, we did with batting practice, their ambivalence that we did with the 2 ways, their feeling that we did yesterday. But as we said, if that's all we did, and we stopped our workshop now, all you would be really good at is letting people tell you why they're not going to change. And letting them walk out of your clinic saying, God, you're so accepting of me not changing. That's wonderful. And if that's where we stopped, Rebecca and her team would think MI is the single worst thing in the world, because all it does is give people a really strong justification to not change. So we have to do the second phase, which is afflict the comfortable. And we do that by fundamentally enhancing change talk. What is change talk? Change talk is the person getting excited about my life without this problem. Or if it's a positive change, getting excited about my life with this thing. And sometimes it's a little bit of both. That getting excited can be verbal. It can be they literally talk about it. They could think about it outside of the counseling session. They can write about it. Some people really like writing about it. But it's not you telling them how wonderful their life is going to be. It's not you being the coach. It's not you selling it. So then why do we have a BMW and a pair of Vanilla Blanc shoes? And the reason is because the way to sell those things is to get people to use them. So what do we know is the best way to sell a car? Single best strategy.
Test drive.
Yeah. What's the best way generally to sell clothes?
Try it on.
So that's what we want to do metaphorically. Now, we don't have a time machine yet. I really think in 10 years, there's people working on this, maybe 5. Virtual reality programs will actually be able to show you. There's already a program that shows you what you look like, but there'll be programs, I think, that you will actually be able to experience what it might feel like to not be a smoker and what it will feel like to be thinner. But until that time, we have to use surrogates, which are talking about it, writing about it, and thinking about it. But the metaphor holds true that it is the act of them feeling it, just like they're driving the BMW with the top down on a beautiful country road, or you're prancing around with those shoes. What we're actually doing is getting them excited about it. What we're actually doing is working their energy up. We're trying to energize this decision by making it feel real, giving them hope they can do it. Another way to think about it, it's a taste test. We're letting them have a bite of it. Now, it would be nice if we can literally give them a bite of your life without smoking, but we don't quite yet have that technology. So MI has this continuum of motivation called darn C, and it's a continuum from weak to strong motivation. There are some problems with this model, but I still want to share with you for a reason that I think will become clear in a few minutes. So the weakest of these is what? If you were to say this is a continuum from weak to strong, which is the weak end? Desire. Which is the strong end? Remember the rule, we don't want to move to how until there's a strong why. We don't jump into action planning until there's a really strong, clear, high-quality motivation. What are the 3 components of high-quality motivation? Volition, importance, and competence. I want to, it's important to me, and I can do it. All right? Where here do you think that is the dividing line between weak and strong motivation? Where would you draw it? So for you, is it below reasons or above? Where's the cut point for adequate motivation? After what? Okay, so you're saying it starts here.
I think it's
I'm
accurate.
gonna say after reason.
You say here,
Plenty of addicts know they're an addict.
right? So it's not clear in terms of the research because there's some problems with definition, but generally we think you have to be at least here or here. And let me explain it in another sort of goofy way. You're having an affair, okay? I'm not going to name names, okay? But you're having an affair. And this guy keeps telling you, I really wish I could leave my wife and marry you. MI tells you, do not tell your current spouse you're cheating because what you heard from that guy is actually ambivalence. I wish I could leave my current wife. That is not sufficient motivation for you to make a life decision. You're trying to switch jobs, and the person you're interviewing, she says to you, I really wish I could hire someone like you. Do not be deluded into thinking you should announce at your current job that you're leaving, because what that is actually ambivalence. And the message about MI is counselors get sucked into premature action discussion when they think this is quality motivation. This is ambivalence. Even statements that sound strong like this can be pseudo statements of commitment. They actually can be statements of ambivalence. So the cautionary tale is even these words that on the surface seem to be motivation, from an MI perspective, are actually still insufficient why to jump to how. It's more, they have to literally commit to action. I'm going to tell her tonight. Now even then, he may chicken out. But if he says, I'm going to tell her tonight, maybe you can go home and reveal the facts. Maybe you can go back to work and say, I think I'm leaving. But until there is this level of strong commitment, this is still actually ambivalence, not autonomous motivation. Now, it's close, but it's not quite there. So I want to remind you of this cardinal rule, which is when it comes to reflecting emotion, it's fine to overshoot. But when it comes to what we're going to do this morning with reflecting change talk, it is generally the rule to undershoot. So if they say, I'm thinking about quitting, you don't say you're ready to quit. There's a strong exception, and the strong exception is if they tell you this, that's okay. If they tell you, I've thought about it, it's my choice, it's meaningful to me, and I have the skills to do it, you could say it sounds like you're ready to quit. But if any of those three are missing, we would still reflect, sounds like you're moving towards thinking about, and in fact, we have a whole dictionary of those reflections. I'm going to tell you a quick story about a study we're doing. We're using natural language processing, which is a computerized technique to analyze language. And we have some really cool engineers at UofM who do this for a living, and they didn't know anything about MI, but they've been analyzing language for years to look at things like emotion and things like that. We sent them hundreds of tapes that were coded as good or bad MI. So we sent them these real encounters from studies we were doing, and we told the computer, this is good and that's bad. And of course, the computer doesn't know anything about MI. It simply knows that this set of files has a value of yes, and this set of files has a value of no. And we said, what is the difference in language? Which is what NLP does, natural language processing, between the two. Guess what it found? It found that one of the major distinctions in the transcripts of MI encounters that were good ones, objectively coded by Bill Miller's group, had tentative language. That's what the computer, because NLP knows how to put words into ontology, so it knows how to take words, and it first looks into a thesaurus, and it tells you, here's the words that are similar, but more important, it tells you the type of word it is. So is it an emotional word? In this case, one of the major findings of the NLP analysis was the computer said, boy, I see a lot of tentative words when I see good MI. These are tentative. Do you see what we mean by tentative? We're hesitant. We're being extra careful to do this. We really want to make sure we don't overshoot their motivation or readiness. So you'd like to take a second to try and digest these. You're going to need them in the exercise we're about to embark on. In your own words, why are we so careful to use tentative language around change talk? What is your intuitive understanding of why are we so hesitant or tentative?
You don't want to scare them.
Right.
back.
Which it creates that thing with an R?
Resistance.
No, the other one, the one we create. Resistance is the one they bring in. Reactance is the one we create. So we don't want to create reactance.
Also, they might feel misunderstood
Correct.
and decrease.
I didn't say I was ready.
Yeah.
I said I was thinking about it. Same like the cheating metaphor. Well, I didn't say I was actually leaving her. I said I would like to leave her. Right. So this exception is important because if the person says, I really thought about it, it's going to be a miserable experience to quit, but I have to do it for my children and for my life and for my God, and I have the skills and I have medication. If someone comes at you like that, go ahead and reflect intense readiness. We do not want to eliminate that entirely. I will tell you it's very rare. Those people are not who shows up in our clinics. All right? Those people are the self-changers. All right? So sometimes, and we've talked about these affirmations under the slide of second person praise, we, if they've started the process, want to make sure we acknowledge that they've already begun. Now, it actually could play out in your study. So even if yours is a single shot study, I'll explain how it could play out. One of your kids could tell you in your single session that I'm fighting a lot less now than I used to. Yes, I got beaten up today. Or I've gotten rid of all the guns, I'm just down to knives and brass knuckles. Or I don't use coke anymore, I just smoke a little weed. Those are all people in the middle of change, and we want to make sure they understand that we hear that. So those are not people who are starting to think about change. Those are people who are, okay? So we have to understand, you're going to probably run into, I don't know what percent, and it'd actually be an interesting scientific question, what percent of the kids in your project feel they've already begun to go north, and how many are still going south? But one of the worst things we can do is tell someone that they really haven't begun, when in their mind, they're a lot better than they used to be. All right, so what we're going to do is practice reflecting on buried change talk. And I've created a series of cases where there's something inside the participant's statement that indicates at least modest interest in potentially changing. It could be, and most of the time it includes problem recognition of some sort, or some sort of statement about, geez, I wish this wasn't part of my life. It's what we really want you to reflect, in addition to the other things, is their little fragment of change talk. And the goal is not simply to reflect it and move on. That completely defeats the purpose. The goal is to get them into the BMW and let them drive it. So all of these strategies are intended to give them an opportunity to elaborate on why life would be better without this. So if you simply reflect it and move on, you have completely defeated the purpose. Okay, you won't know because this is a one-way exchange, but in the real world you will hopefully remember that when you start. So, where is the change talk? Who would like to reflect it?
So you know it's wrong to get into these fights, and you do hate getting into trouble at school.
Good, now add some poetry to it. That's okay. That was a literal reflection that was very accurate. It is good, but now how would you restate that in a way that shows you have processed it? Make it into a movie of the week. I'm going to make this really concrete so you don't feel overwhelmed at all. Give me another way to say, I hate getting in trouble at school. What are two other ways you could state that back to him?
So it makes you mad when you get in trouble.
Good.
Or it pisses you off when you get in trouble at school.
Good, that's one. Try one other way to restate with some poetry that.
Getting in trouble at school sucks.
You're starting to get tired of being,
in trouble.
you're starting to feel enough already. You're starting to think, I want something else. I don't want to be that kid anymore. It's starting to cause problems in many areas of your life. Those are all sort of universal ways to say the same thing. And don't be worried, the change talk reflections are harder. So you'll get there. What's 2 ways to restate this one?
I know it's wrong, just that part.
Yeah, that first sentence. Restate that problem recognition. Clearly that is problem recognition, but restate it without having to be a literal paraphrase. That's a little bit poetry free.
You're unhappy about fighting
Okay.
in school.
Let's get even more poetic. What else could you say about this?
You're starting to realize that these fights are not what you want to be doing.
Yes, it has that slight poetic narrative that we're looking for. You're getting it, okay? It's not easy, all right? Now, if I asked you, and this was your final exam before you graduate and get your $1 million prize, and I said, could you please roll with the resistance, although this is not the primary point of this activity, but you still need to roll with the resistance, what would be the roll with the resistance reflection?
Life is hard for you, and making people realize that it's frustrating can be frustrating.
Okay, I like that. We can be a little bit more specific about living in Flint.
Living in Flint is difficult for you.
Yeah. Anyone else want to try this one?
Do you feel like you need to fight
Yeah,
to protect yourself?
sure. Next. Here, I want to again go back to the change talk.
Sounds like you're sick of being here and seeing our faces, and that you've already decided that you need to do something different in your life to make a change.
The only thing I would say is you overstated the readiness. Do you know what I mean?
Always said maybe I need
Yeah,
to
so you have to go under, not over it. You went over it. All right? Everything else was dead on. Who else would like to try this one? Get poetic with it. Talk about a narrative.
You're feeling exhausted and depleted.
Good.
And part of it is you're just tired of coming here. And you're starting to realize that you're looking to have a life change.
Yeah.
Or you're maybe not with that's too strong.
Thinking about, moving towards,
You're thinking
hoping
about-
for, all those
Mhm.
lower level change talk terms actually come in handy here. Those things we talked about that are ambivalent. Now, although this is a little bit crunchy humanistic psychology stuff, and not every kid's going to like it, things like, it sounds like you're starting to come to the realization that this isn't for you. This isn't the guy you wanted to be. This isn't the young man that you had envisioned you'd be at 24. And if they're religious, hopefully you'll figure that out. This isn't, you think, what God had in store for you. For someone who's religious, that's a very powerful reflection, I can tell you. If they're not, it's a terrible mismatch. Of course, be careful. I do like what you picked up on. You're getting tired of this. It's just exhausting, fighting all the time, getting hurt, getting patched up, and getting thrown out there. Like, you're starting to reach the end of this.
You're getting concerned, things are getting more serious, it's getting more frequent that you're here.
Yeah.
Thinking that maybe it's time to start considering other ways of handling situations so you don't
Yeah.
end up back here again.
And you're a little scared that maybe next time you won't, just walk out with some stitches. Our only concern about that, so first of all, your insight was dead on. It's a great way to read between the lines is, do you remember what is the type of motivation we want the patient to leave with? What is the type of motivation they enter with? Do you remember? We want them to leave with autonomous. They enter with control. So fear tends to be a controlling motivation. So in general, absolutely it's okay to recognize fear. Our goal is to get them to leave with autonomy. So we would like to convert that fear into the life you want, who you want to be, and sort of reframe it. But absolutely, it's great you picked up on the fear. Okay? This is a study we did with returning vets who have PTSD from the Michigan National Guard. Where's the change talk? All right, now convert that into a change talk statement.
Sounds like you think there might be benefit in therapy.
Yeah, you're starting to think that this isn't going to fix itself. You're starting to think that maybe you might actually need some help here. You're starting to feel that this is getting a little out of control. You're starting to wonder why things aren't better yet. Those are all reasonable reflections to that tiny fragment. We'll make this the last one. Anyone? Change talk. Things have been bad with my wife is also problem recognition. So there's 2 fragments of change talk here. Possibly a third. We could even argue scream at her all the time is actually a form of problem recognition. So how would you construct the change talk reflection for this guy? So you're aware that things have actually been worse since you've come back. You're aware that this is not the dad or husband you would like to be. Okay? Getting a little bit meta. There we're getting into that more humanistic type of reflection, but they can be very, very powerful. All right. We're going to move on to another set of strategies here. We refer to the ones we just did as magnifying organic change talk. So in the cases we just showed you, the person, although it was buried, it was oblique in some ways, it was not the most noticeable aspect of their statement, they did at least refer to some reason for change. And your job in those cases is to reflect it so the person continues to elaborate about it. But it is often the case that that is not enough to get you to a commitment. That's not enough change talk on its own to get the person to say, okay, I'm ready. So, sometimes we have to manufacture it. Now, we still assume it's inside the person, so manufacture, some people don't like the term. Sometimes we have to dig deeper, sometimes we have to coax, or sometimes we have to lubricate, however it works for you. We have to sometimes get additional change talk. We're going to talk about 2 different strategies that we use that I think for sure number 1 will work in your study, and I actually think number 2 will. Number 1 is going to be the rulers, confidence and importance. Number 2 is values and strengths. So you will in fact see these strategies in your protocol. Historically, this is the single most adopted MI strategy by healthcare. It's somehow, for whatever reason, it caught on, just like stages of change caught on, because it's this beautiful algorithm that makes it seem too easy. Well, so too this sort of caught on, I think, because it makes it seem too easy. So it is imperfect, it is not going to fix all your problems, but it's a really good tool. And the tool works like this. On a scale of 0 to 10, in your case, I didn't bother to do it. What would you be putting inside the parentheses for your study? Okay, stop fighting. What are other things that will likely go in those parentheses in your study?
Quit drinking.
Quit drinking. What are some other things that will go inside the parentheses in your study?
Reduce your marijuana use.
Less weed use. What are some other things that will go inside the parentheses of your study?
Stop carrying weapons.
And I would maybe, you can even say also stop getting hurt, stop getting in trouble, stop fighting with your girlfriend. It can be whatever you have identified, hopefully quickly, so you know what we're talking about. Our general rule is we ask both of the questions together at the same time. There is an argument to separate them. Our experience is it's better to have both numbers immediately, and I'll tell you why. If they give you a 10-10, we know we have a little problem in front of us. We have bravado, because rarely is someone truly a 10-10, okay? It's possible. Or if we have a 0-0, we have a real problem. We have an amotivated person. So because of that and one other reason, it is really good to have both numbers immediately, because it tells you what you got. If you get a 5-5, it tells you something else, and what it's telling you is they don't really see the distinction. And their ambivalence is often yoked, and I'll tell you why it happens, and it's actually not a bad thing. A person will often say, it's a 5-5 because if it was more important to me, I'd feel more confident, and if I was more confident, I feel it's more important. When they become yoked like that, don't worry, just ask in general about the probes, and these are the 3 probes. Person chose a 7 for reducing their weed intake. and the person chose a 3 for their confidence to do so. We would ask up to 3 probes. We will not ask 6. That would almost never happen. So each score, importance and confidence, maximally has up to 3 probes, but we almost never would ask all 3. The first one that we almost always ask is, hey, you picked a 7 for importance for reducing weed. Why not a lower number? What type of stuff should emanate from the kid's mouth when you say a 7 and not a lower number? What are we pulling for? What should they say? What's the logical answer to why not a 7? Sorry, why not a lower number? Are they going to give you change talk or counter change talk? Change talk. Why is 7 and not a lower number? Think of what the logical answer is. We'll play it out. What should they be answering you? It's a 7 because, and it's not lower because.
No, it's a problem.
It's a problem. I want to do something else in my life. I'm tired of coming to the ER. Weed is making me a zombie. Conversely, if you ask why not a higher number, what is going to logically come out of their mouth? Thank you. So in simple terms, all these probes are change talk and counter change talk. They're just a numerical gimmick to elicit change talk and counter change talk. Now, I haven't talked about the third probe. I'm getting there. The third probe is not as clean cut as the first 2. It usually gets what? Most of the time, when you ask, what would it take to get to a higher number? What would you expect will come out of the person's mouth? Most of the time. What would it take to get to a higher number?
Possibilities.
Yeah. Solution, same thing. Are we in agreement? Okay. So it's a beautiful gimmick for asking someone, what are the reasons for change? What are your fears? How do you solve it? But it's nice because the numbers catch them by surprise. There's sometimes a little bit of aha. It can be very cute when it works. Okay? Now, if I were to have a final exam for our workshop, and you would have to get it right before you graduate, I would ask you the following. If the swamp of negativity has already been drained in phase 1 of your session, which of the 3 probes would you skip? And why, for extra credit? I'll repeat it. If the swamp of negativity from this patient has already been drained, which of these 3 probes would you skip and why, for extra credit? Barriers are allowed, benefits are encouraged.
Would you skip the second one, the higher one?
You're asking me a question. I'm
Because you
asking
don't want
you.
to elicit counter change talk?
Tiffany is a graduate of our program. So the correct answer is we skip number 2 because if we've already drained the swamp, we don't need to elaborate on it. The counter change talk, well, that's already been put in a nice freezer and hauled away by you got junk. Okay? So for that reason, number 2 is generally skipped if you're doing it later in the encounter. The reason it's up there is because very nice people who like MI do it as the first thing. We don't. I'm not a big fan of it, but they're good. I respect them, and they'll say, welcome, Shannon, on a scale of 0 to 10. Literally, it's like their opening thing. And their reason is I want to get my bearings. I want to know what I got in front of me, you know? Okay. We do it later. You're doing it even later. And skip number 2 as a rule. All right? One of the reasons we ask about importance and confidence is actually, I think, interesting conceptually. We could have asked on a scale of 0 to 10, how ready are you? That seems like more obvious, doesn't it? On a scale of 10, how ready are you? But we don't ask that. Who wants to guess why? Why don't we ask, how ready are you? When it seems so obvious.
It doesn't really tell me anything.
Correct. That's basically the answer. And what we argue is your readiness is the product of your importance and confidence. And there's not one type of readiness. There are, in fact, 4 types of readiness. There's a high, a low, and a mixed. And by having those numbers, like a 7 and a 2, we have a mix. So I'm going to ask you, if someone says 7 for importance and 2 for confidence, which quadrant are they in? I'll repeat it because it's a complex. This is another way to graduate. Tiffany's graduated. If anyone would like to graduate, you have to get this in right. A 7 for importance and a 2 for confidence, which quadrant does that put them in? You all agree? You all graduated. Those of you who agreed. That's a can't but wants to. Similarly, someone gave you a 2 and a 7. 2 for importance and 7 for confidence. What are they? Okay? Which do you think you'll see more of in your study? Or maybe it'll be the same, 50-50. Which of these do you think is going to be a more common pattern? I can do it and I don't want to, or I want to do it but I don't think I can pull it off.
Yeah,
Can but doesn't want to.
yeah, that's what I've seen more of.
Now, in narrative form, tell us about a can but doesn't want to in your world. Are we talking about the violence part or the drug part? So talk about it. So what does this kid say?
They don't want to give up their drug of choice because their life sucks and they don't see any value in quitting. This is what gets them by every day.
I could quit, I just don't want to. Who can describe a can't but wants to?
Fighting.
Huh?
Fighting.
Go ahead.
I want to, but I can't because of my reputation.
Right.
Where I go, people
My
think I'm
culture and community, and very good. And I'll give you a classic case is the addict. An addict
Oh, yeah.
will say, I would do anything to get rid of this drug, but every time I try, I relapse. So that's another. Now I understand most of the kids in your study are not actually probably even technically addicted, and well, I'm sure a few are, but it's not your primary. So anyway, very nice. And the reason, therefore, we ask about this and this is it gives you that nuance. Readiness buries that nuance and doesn't give you that fine, granular distinction. So that's why we separate it into 2 dimensions. Now, the numbers are nice, they're cute. When they work, you have this really nice interaction. How many of you, however, would be so kind as to admit you don't really like numbers, that you've never been a fan of math, and any form of math pisses or scares you? Okay. The loving term for it is your medical numeracy is on the lower end of the spectrum. So we do find these people. Sometimes it's age, sometimes it's IQ, sometimes it's just, I hated math. So we have another way to get at the exact same change talk, and it's simply this. Hey, what is it about drugs that work for you? What about drugs that's not working for you? What skills do you have? What skills don't you have? It's just very literal, narrative, conversational way to get at it that the numbers normally work. But if you feel the person's like, get these numbers away from me, I don't want to do anything in math. You don't need it. You don't need the math. You can just quickly, seamlessly, quietly shift to this. I'll just give you one of the indications the math didn't work, and it actually happened in the room. So I'm actually, 2 of you, I'm never letting you do the 0 to 10. If I say, why not a lower number? And the patient or the participant says, barriers in response to that, they did not understand your question, right? At that point, drop the numbers. You're not helping. They have basically, in their own words, said, I am confused. And at that point, there's no reason to even mention. Say, okay, let's talk about the other one. So what are the things you like about it? So quickly to switch to the pros, P-R-O-S-E, not P-R-O-S. Got it? Good. This is just a nice additional set of questions that are used when the swamp is only partially drained. A lot of times you will get most of the resistance out. What do you really dread about this? What do you really dread about giving up weed? What do you really dread about walking around without a weapon? What do you really dread about coming to the ER? It's a really nice, it's very blunt, it's very direct, there's nothing subtle about this question. But when you hear a lot of negative and you are having trouble sorting out what his bullshit is about, this is a really nice question. So although it violates a few of our rules about emphasizing the negative, sometimes you just need to know what's your bullshit about. What's really holding you back. We have to now move on to the second class of change talk elicitation or change talk manufacturing. The 0 to 10 is good. Most of the time it's going to get you change talk. But it has one primary limitation. And the primary limitation is the type of change talk it gets rarely touches on deeper feelings and values. Meaning you get the superficial, I don't want to be in trouble with the law. That's a good one. I'm happy. That's good. I'll take that. I don't want to become an addict. I'll take that. But it doesn't always touch on things like, it's not what God had in store for me. It rarely leads that. It can. If you're lucky and the person's super high verbal, super insightful, you might get that. But we want to get to that level of discussion. We want to talk about your view of what life had in store for you. We want to get to that discussion of what did you hope for yourself at this stage of your life? What do you hope for yourself in 5 years? Because when those work, they're really compelling reasons to change. Those are things that energize, those build these really strong discrepancy in moments like, wow, this is not who I want to be. So to seed that conversation of this is not who I want to be, we and others have created this little activity. And the activity works basically, well, this is one of the more creative studies to show you the role of values I've ever seen. The entire study only had 92 college students. We have to be careful not to overinterpret, but it's still really cool what they did. Bunch of wacky psychologists to 2 groups of college students and randomized them to either say, you were picked to be on the team or you didn't make it. They filled out a bunch of questionnaires and they were lied that there's a whole elaborate process of whether or not someone else is going to pick you on their team. Turns out the questionnaire had nothing to do with what happened. You were randomly assigned to be excluded or not excluded. If you were excluded, you were given this rather depressing news. You suck. No one wanted you on your team. The other half of the sample was told, well, you made the team, but it was random because we really couldn't match you. But you made the team, just not necessarily because you had anything good you did. But you weren't excluded. So there's these 2 different manipulations. The goal of this manipulation was to put the person in a negative affective state, which is academic terminology to make them feel like shit. So they intentionally made them feel like shit. And this group, they made them feel like, I'm not great, but at least I made it. All right? Now comes the study. They now took both of those groups and randomized them to one of 3 activities. In the first activity, they were saying, please write about something bigger than yourself. Write about a value bigger than yourself. The second group was randomized to write about what we referred to as sort of selfish or narcissistic values. And I'll say this now because this is true. I've been doing this for years, this study and this exact part of the training. And before Donald Trump ever decided to run for office, we actually referred to these as Donald Trump values. So Gandhi and Donald Trump.
Wow.
And that's how we've always said this. So it's not just picking on our current Republican leader. And then the third group is assigned to write about daily mundane activities. Study's not over yet. So what we've done, we've randomized 2 groups to feel like shit and to sort of feel, I did okay. At least I didn't lose. All right? And then they were randomly assigned to do these tasks, 1 of 3 tasks, and they only did 1. They didn't cross over. And now comes the funky part. And they lied again, but they lied at really cool things. They said, oh, by the way, before you go, we have a new recipe for chocolate chip cookies we're about to market. Could you please taste them? This was actually the study.
Oh.
The dependent variable for the study was cookies eaten. This is actually the treatment effect. What they found was, amongst the subset who were excluded, hold on, because it did not play out for those who were not excluded, but for the subset of, I think it was 46, half, who were told, you failed, you didn't make it, you suck. If they wrote about Gandhi-type values, they only ate 3 cookies. If they wrote about Donald Trump values, 5 cookies. If they wrote about what they did for the morning, they ate 8 cookies. And these are significantly different than each other. So how do we interpret this study, and what does it tell us about motivational interviewing?
Well, I think that in the Gandhi one, you're encouraging more support and community and a relationship between you and the person, and letting them kind of like find themselves.
Okay, you do sound like an Ann Arbor resident.
It's only because you know.
No.
No.
Yes, we're getting there. So what are some other psychological interpretations? And yes, we have to get to that humanistic level to understand this. What does writing about that do to suppress your appetite?
Does it humble you or just it makes you conscious about I don't
So
know.
let me just add to it. The negative affective state created a hunger.
The what?
The negative affective state, which is a fancy way of saying you were excluded, you made it feel like shit, that created an imbalance. It created some state that the person was vulnerable to eating cookies. What would you say that state was? What's the description? What's the association between feeling like crap and eating cookies? What are you using cookies to do?
Soothe yourself.
Feel better.
Right. So if you're trying to either assuage your pain, fill up your void, what is your interpretation therefore? Much what? Yeah. So somehow, writing about transcendent values filled the void, and I want to be less philosophic here. Maybe it's this much more mundane explanation, distracted them from the void. Maybe it didn't fix it, it just shifted their thinking from wah, wah, woe is me into there's people out there who have it worse. So it may be filling the void, it may be distraction, but it did something positive so that people who normally would be in a sort of binging state to eat food to comfort, somehow this stopped that or suppressed that.
That is the totally excluded.
Yes. We haven't gotten to the unexcluded people. That's our next slide. Now keep in mind, and this is why we talk about controlled motivation is not bad. It's better than nothing. Yes, controlled motivation, shame, guilt, social comparison, or in this case, the pursuit of Hollywood-type values, still can drive people. Self-determination theory is wonderful, but it has one really or two powerful flaws, and I've embarrassed them in public a few times, just stir the pot. I said, well, you say that these controlled motivations don't work long-term, and that at most they can last a year or two. I said, how come rock and roll people and Hollywood stars are so thin for life? They have the most vile extrinsic motivations. They're entirely seeking fame and power. Everything we say is bad, that shit works. Those people have incredible long-term weight control. And it's not just cocaine. And it's not just personal chefs and smoking. Okay? It helps. They do help. That's 15% metabolism boost right there. But it seems to be true even amongst the unaddicted. So, for lack of a better term, if you remember Michael Douglas's line from Wall Street, greed, for lack of a better term, works. Well, extrinsic motivation, for lack of a better alternative, works much better than nothing. So I don't want to throw out fear, like you said earlier. It's okay. If we got fear, I'll start with that. I want to move it here, but fear, better than nothing. Now, this is the graph of this data. When you look at the non-excluded who were not put into that negative affective state, were not made to feel like shit because they told you made it, even if it was for random reasons, the manipulation had no effect. If you're a scientist, this is an interaction effect. What does this mean for motivational interviewing and what we're about to talk about? We're about to talk about this and linking values to behavior change. What does this study tell us?
You really want to get people to think about their deep and impersonal values that really resonate.
Are the patients in an ED in a wonderful emotional state? Are they, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. I love coming to the emergency room. No offense, Pat, Rebecca, you know, we don't look forward to it.
Because they do want their slippers, but yeah,
Yes,
for the most
no.
part, no.
No, it's a miserable experience. One of the reasons I always laugh that all the ER docs I know hate going to the ER. It always worries me. Like they said, no, the last thing you want to do is have to go to the emergency room. You could be there for hours. they're in a state where I think values could be really powerful. They're in this vulnerable state where if we can link the behavior change to values, it might be particularly powerful. This is that teachable moment we talk about. So if we can now have a discussion of who you want to be, I think this is a really good context. Why I think your team studies work so well is I think you're working in this teachable moment, this vulnerable moment. So here's what we do. We ask the person, what's important to you, young man or young woman? And we give them a list. I don't know exactly which list you chose, but there's a list that you'll see somewhere between now and 5 o'clock. And we have a whole bunch of lists. I'll share them. We have one in Spanish. We have it in 12 languages. So we ask you, what's important to you, young man? What did you want out of life? What here do you value? And we have it, again, we have it from 12 countries, and I think 12 languages as well. Anyway. And we ask, what's important to you? So what we want to do with these values is several things. We now have in front of us potential change talk, which is, remember what this is all about. And the way we create the change talk is, hey, how might any of the values you chose motivate you to maybe quit some of this? Either stop fighting or stop using drugs. And then we reverse the question and say, I wonder if you were to either be less involved in violence and or less involved in drugs, how that might help you achieve your values. So we ask it both ways. We ask how the value could inspire the change, and we ask how the change can enhance their values. Either way, it's change talk. Either way, if they give you something, you now will reflect it and elaborate on it. You're giving them additional change talk. That's what we mean by this is a way to manufacture change talk. It is generally unlikely that they will naturally in their conversation say, I'll just pick one of our lists. This is more for sort of younger adolescents. Your study sample's older, but let's just say they're like 13, 14, 15-year-olds. They will rarely say, you know, I really want to feel strong. I really want to feel spiritual. I really want to feel that I'm a disciplined kid. That's not generally how they're going to talk to you. So by seeding the conversation, you're just increasing the chances that these topics will be discussed, all right? We don't necessarily want to ask any of the values is asked, not all. We don't want to say, how does it affect all these values? That actually backfires, because it may not affect all of them. We're happy if it affects any of them. So be careful in your language to say, how might changing the behavior affect any? If you say all, it leads to this unfortunate conversation. We'll say, but I don't see any connection to that, and then you've defeated the whole purpose. So ask it in a way that if they find one connection, you're happy. So here's another way to get your graduation certificate for those of you who haven't graduated. Our lists do not include the word healthy. Why would it be so stupid to leave out health when we're talking in an emergency room and we're talking about health? This is an NIH study, the National Institutes of Health. And yet we have excluded health from our list of all values. There's one or two where it's on there because there's someone else's. Our lists exclude health.
Because all of those things lead to good health.
You're getting there. There's a connection. Do people value health? Or is health just something that when you lose it, gets in the way? For most people, health is something they only notice when they lose it. Even public health students who are thinking about health, that's all they do for a living, and physicians, nurses, generally don't actually value health in the same way they value God, family, morality. So it turns out health is actually not a value. Health is a means to an end. You're healthy, you're more likely to feel you can go out and help your community, you can go out and be productive. But health is not actually an abstraction we pursue. So we want to take health out of it, and there's one other reason. The 0 to 10 will almost always get the health stuff. So the 0 to 10 will get you, it's bad for me to be cut up. But we want to get that other level down. So the problem with health is A, it's a mediator, it's not a value, and B, it's the top line usually that we've already heard about. So that's why we don't have it on our lists. However, if you feel adding it to the conversation will enhance their ability to link it to their values, go ahead. Say, well, let's say you lost your health, or let's say your health improved. I want to give you one other trick here. And the trick is, the way I did it is called the organic method. The organic method is you choose the values and then you ask them if there's a connection. Choose the values, probe if there's a connection. Sometimes they say, nope, I don't see a connection between the 3 values and my behavior, I'm sorry. Then we go back to what we call the directive method. And the directive method is a little different. It says, you know what, look at this list. If you were to stop getting involved in fights, or if you were to stop using weed, does anything in your life get better? And we simply allow the entire list to be fair game. The advantage of the organic method is you've allowed it to focus on the 3 things that they already value, so it increases the chances of a strong connection. But if that doesn't work, we don't want to give up yet, and we'll say, hey, is there anything here that motivates you to stop, or is there anything here that if you stopped, becomes more likely for you to achieve? So that's the directed method, or that's sort of the full pass method, all right? Organic first, and then the full pass or directed method. We have these 3 examples of how to bring up values. These are just samples so that you have language to broach the topic. Some people find it awkward to start talking about this. Here's 3 ways that have worked for our practitioners. What I'd like you to do real quick is read them and say which ones you like. Which is your best entry? How do you think you would probably introduce the topic? Which of these feels the most seamless? The good answer is there's no right or wrong answer. Whatever one you like, take it and adapt it. In our study in African Americans in the South, we just reported this is the first 135 people who ever did it. This is the values they chose. Now keep in mind, we were working in black churches. That does subtly bias people in that context who say spiritual, good parent, okay, and not to focus on Donald Trump values. So it turns out that these same people, if you asked in their homes, would slightly de-emphasize spiritual and good Christian. Not that they don't value those, it just drops into the 30s or 40s. Now we're going to move on to the next strategy. When we use the rulers, and you don't have to, but if you use them, and I think it's in your protocol, as Jeff said, and you get a low number for value, for importance, we generally encourage you to do the values activity. So that's just what I showed you. And I'm going to demonstrate it with you guys in a minute. If confidence is low, we're going to go about it slightly differently. If confidence is low, clinically, what do we want to achieve with that person? So think about the high quality motivation is defined as volition, importance, and confidence. So if someone's confidence is low, what do we want to do clinically? What do we want to build? Yeah, we want to either build their skills or their perceived ability to achieve that end. So when we are trying to build confidence or competence, and they're really the same related construct, we do it slightly differently. We use a list. Again, we ask them to choose. Again, we ask them to link it to the behavior at hand, but we're asking or framing it in a slightly different way. We want to, instead of asking, what do you value? We're going to ask, what are you good at? What have you achieved? What have you overcome? Okay? Now this list, a little bit differently than the values list, is a little bit more of just suggested things, and we focus here a lot more on the other. It could be anything, and we want to tell them. It could be anything you've achieved. It could be an English test you got a C on, but it was much better than last year. It could be the most bizarre, tiny little thing. So this list is not meant to be exhaustive. It's simply meant to give them samples. The probes are similar. They're not quite the same. The probes for values are how, if at all, do the values motivate the behavior change? Or how might, if you made the behavior change, inspire your values? What do you think the probes would be here? It's similar, but you have a kid who doesn't feel confident they can give up drugs. You have a kid who doesn't feel confident they can walk around without a weapon, or doesn't feel confident they could resist a fight if someone calls them a name. What would be the probe after they've picked something from this list, or they just say, what I'm really good at? Now we have to be careful, by the way, if they say the best thing I'm good at is fighting. We have to be careful of that. Okay, now there's a way around it, but it's tricky. So in general, it would be okay to say, is there anything else? Because that one's going to end up counter change talk. All right, I'm really a good shot with my gun. Another fine skill I have. So we're going to try and discourage those, and I'm not trying to be glib, but those could backfire, no pun intended. So what would be the probe here? If they picked, I am actually good at math, I am a really good brother to my little sister, and I am loyal. Or I made the varsity football team. Or I am a really good artist, I draw well. What would you do if and all these kids have strengths, so thank goodness almost every kid has some island of competence. And in fact, if they have no islands of competence, that's actually a huge clinical, that's bad. That's a bad sign. That's a kid who could be depressed. That's a kid who's at really great risk. So let's assume that most of the kids will find some island of competence. What are you going to do with it?
Help them transfer the confidence that they have in one area to.
How would you try to probe that? What was some language you could do for a kid who chose, I'm a good artist, I'm loyal, and I'm a good brother?
Tell me what kind of skills, things you do that make you believe that.
And I want to connect it to their giving up drugs or stop fighting. So how do you try in your question to link them?
So what effect is your drug use having on your ability to be a good big brother?
See, that one is more the values approach. So I want to change how you use it. I want to instead think about it, how does the fact that you're a good brother, or how does the fact that you're good at art, how does the fact that you made the football team help build some confidence that maybe you could give up weed? Or how does it help inform you that maybe you could not carry a gun? So it's slightly different. What you're trying to do is build up their confidence. I've achieved this, or I have this ability. Maybe, just maybe, that tells me I'm stronger than I think. That's the goal, okay? It's subtle, and because they're so similar, we don't usually do both with the same person. So if you do both, it does end up having, I think, too much overlap and therefore feels redundant. So you kind of have to make a clinical decision. We usually like you to decide with this. These are from the rulers. You just sort of use the numbers to guide you. If you got a 7-7, just use your clinical judgment, because you don't want to do both. All right, so normally you take the lowest number of importance or confidence, but if it's a tie or they're only 1 point apart, I think we trust you'll pick one that your intuition tells you. One note, this is harder than the values. The values has a slightly higher hit rate of change talk than does the strengths. Strengths is a little bit harder. Some person may say, I'm a great artist, I have no freaking clue how that's going to help me quit drugs. In fact, when I get high, I'm a bad artist, so it's really fucked up. Okay? So the connection from skill and ability to confidence building for violent substance abuse, it's there. Because if the person says, I worked really hard in the off season, I worked out with weights, I lost weight, now I'm a better football player, so well, that same discipline can help me quit drugs, that's golden. Or I worked out, now I'm strong and I'm not as scared, so I don't have to fight as much because I'm not as scared as I used to be. That could be golden, but it's harder. So keep in mind the values link is a little bit more high yield than the strengths link. All right? All right. So just to keep you we're still here. We're still building the guiding phase. And we will just touch on action reflections before we leave. But I want to now do a little activity with you. Now I'm going to put up something and see if this works. It usually does. So I'd like all of you, if you would, to write down a behavior you feel you should be doing but you're not. It is easier if it's health related, but it does not have to be. So if you have something about food, something about exercise, something about your smoking or drinking, that's awesome because it directly fits. If not, pick another life thing you are struggling with. I should go back to school, I should confront my brother, but in any case, has to be something you're ambivalent about. Something you kind of feel you should do, but you're not quite adequately motivated to start. So something you are resisting doing. All right? Please write down that behavior. Now, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to write down your answers. Question number 1. On a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the most important, how important is that change for you? 0 to 10, how important is that change for you? Number 2, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being extremely confident, how confident are you? if you decided to change, you would succeed and it would stick. Number 3, please look at this list of values. Please find on this list 2, 3, or 4 things that you value that are important to you, that are consistent with your life goals. Please pick a few, up to maybe 3 or 4, that you value, that you want out of life. All right, now I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to do a little mini activity with, we'll probably have a chance to do a few of you. Who would like to go first? We're going to play a little bit of Phase 2 MI with you. Who wants to go? Tiffany, please start out by saying what the behavior is, if you'd be so kind.
Flossing my teeth every day.
That one is a tough one. It may or may not work. I can tell you from having done this for a long time. But we're going to try it. We actually trained our dental assistants in MI, believe it or not, every year. What were your numbers for importance and confidence?
6 and 4.
So tell me a little bit about why flossing was a 6 and not a lower number.
Because I want to have my own teeth, and I don't really like going to the dentist. So when I go, I don't like when they have to do a lot of scraping and things like that. So it's something that I want to be proactive about as far as preventing the tartar buildup, et cetera, et cetera.
So if you don't floss and you have to go to the dentist, you don't like them fussing in there and
Right.
scraping. That's really noxious.
Yeah,
It is gross.
oh my God, it drives me nuts.
Hate it. So part of it is I just want to avoid that.
Yes.
Then also you don't want to end up an old lady with dentures
Right.
and a bunch of...
Grosses me out.
Yet your confidence was lower.
Because I've tried it like a million times. And every time I go to the dentist, my dentist says, "Are you flossing?" And I'll say, "Well, once or twice a week." Okay, I'm gonna do it, and then I'll do it for like a week, and then
So you're worried that your efforts sputter. You give it a college try, but after a couple of weeks, you're back to 0 to 1 time a week, roughly. So you don't have a lot of confidence because you just don't know what to do to make it more real. You don't know what to do to remind yourself every day.
yeah, unless I have something stuck in my tooth, I just
Right.
don't do it.
So you have to be prompted by the physical sensation in there. The abstract idea of clean teeth doesn't do it.
No.
Okay. Looking at the values you chose, could you share those with us?
Sure, good parent, attractive, and disciplined.
You know, it doesn't always work, but I wonder if you look at those 3 values, if there's anything in there that might inspire you to floss. So looking at those 3, can you see any connection between any of the 3 you chose and maybe why you might want to be a regular flosser?
I think probably the primary one is good parent, because I want to role model healthy behaviors for my children. I have 3 of them. So it's easy for me to tell them what they should do versus
Model it.
modeling it for them.
So by you being a good role model, you're setting your kids up for a healthier life, maybe less dental costs and less scrapey.
Right.
But it's hard because there's something missing for you in terms of the reminder. You're struggling. What would be the equivalent of something stuck in my tooth without it being stuck in my tooth?
I don't know, it's hard because I've never had dental issues. Like, I never had I've never had a cavity. So I think my lack of
Consequence.
consequence, the risk, I don't appreciate the risk associated
Right.
with flossing. So
You're not really convinced you're going to lose any of those beautiful pearly whites there.
yeah, I'm like, I still have sealants from when I was 11,
Yeah.
so I'm good.
Yeah, so the biggest issue is I'm not really sure any of the negative stuff's going to happen. But it's interesting that independent of the cavities and losing teeth, you really hate the scrapey, but yet that's not enough for you to floss regularly. That seems a little bit discrepant because you really hate them fussing in there. You would love them to say, "Oh, you're good to go, you can leave." That would be great.
Yeah, but it's not something I think about until I'm in the chair.
Right.
I don't know. I need
So
that-
somehow transferring that expectation or that image into your daily life somehow. I don't know what that is, but that's what's missing for you.
Yep.
I'm going to leave you be for a minute, okay? Who would like to go next?
For the exercise?
What's your numbers? Oh, how much? Tell me a little bit about. How much exercise do you want to be doing?
Around 5, 7.
Times a week or minutes?
I would like to do
¿Cuántas veces?
5 times.
Cada semana?
Yeah, during the semana, the week.
Okay. What are your two numbers?
Because sometimes I'm feeling it's 5 to 7.
Oh,
Because,
importancia is a 5 and confidencia is a 7?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And now I'm going to ask you if you feel you want to translate, so fine. Why is it a 5? Why is exercise important enough to be a 5?
Because I want to feel more energetic, more healthy.
Okay. So when you don't exercise, you feel no energy and you're sleepy and you're tired. And you want to be able to get more things done in your life.
Exactly.
And exercise will give you that energy.
Mhm.
On the other hand, it's not a 10. Your motivation is not that high. What is holding it down?
Because I have been too excited. I don't have energy for that. I want rest because I was working all day or something like that.
So cansado, you're tired.
I'm tired.
And because of that, you can't get up to exercise.
Mhm.
What would it take to make your number higher? How could you get to an 8 or 9 for motivation, not just a 5? What would it mean? What would it take?
Maybe more motivation. Maybe.
What would motivate you?
Feeling better, I think so.
So this is you're in a circle. I would feel better if I exercise, but I'm too tired to
Yeah,
exercise.
that's right.
How do you get out of the circle? How do you get started so you'll get some energy from exercise? How do you get your foot in there?
Maybe put more discipline and take like a schedule.
Good. So there's an answer that maybe if you were to set a goal and to plan it,
Mhm.
you might be more likely to do it. What values did you choose? You already mentioned one value, which is energy.
Energy.
What are some other values?
Discipline and strong.
Strong. So how do you see those connected to your exercise? Discipline and strong and energetic. How are those connected to you?
Yeah, because discipline, because I have to take my schedules and healthy and exercise and feeling more strong.
Yeah. Now, the hard thing for you is getting started. And for you, you're saying to get started, maybe I need to set a plan.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, what is a plan? Does that mean putting it in your iPhone, writing it in your kitchen, telling
Yeah,
your
sometimes I
daughter?
have to plan like when you have the appointment. Example 5 to 6, go to the gym or something like that.
Okay. Sounds like you've been thinking about this a little bit.
Yeah, I am thinking.
Okay, we're going to stop there. Who would like to go next?
I guess I can do exercise as
Thank
well.
you.
Yeah. Let's see.
Just to help me, what type of exercise are
Well,
you?
weight loss.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lose weight.
And do you want to talk about weight loss or exercise? Which if you had
Well,
a
I
separate.
guess I kind of have them as both right
Okay.
now.
What type of exercise do you think might help you lose weight?
Probably walking would be the best.
Okay. So we're talking about walking. That's fine.
Okay, sure.
What are your numbers for that? Importance and confidence.
Importance would be 8. The confidence is about a 1 or 2 right now.
All right. So let's talk about those numbers.
Sure.
Let's start with 8's pretty high. That
Yeah.
says you're really thinking about this. Tell me why this is so important
Yeah,
to you.
I think about it all the time. I've signed up for every health thing with UofM. Haven't done a thing. Signed up for all these programs. Haven't done.
So
a thing.
you're an M healthy participation.
Oh, everything. Yeah.
You got your
Every time I
50
get an
you
email,
got
I
your
put
50
my name on it.
your
they send
50
me
bucks?
text, and, yeah, I get reminders and always the bells and whistles. Yeah.
I just have to tell you, the thing I'm missing today is I'm the chair of the M Healthy Incentive Communications Committee. So you're going to be hearing from us. This is true, actually. All right.
Jamie is real today.
Right.
All right. So you keep seriously. You keep sputtering out. You make the commitment. But you can't stick. You can't get to the class, or you can't get to the second class.
Can't log my minutes, can't do.
Yeah.
Yeah, can't do
You set
it.
the goal, but you
Right.
can't fall through.
Mhm.
But it's really important. You're thinking about this for a long time.
Mhm.
Your weight's bugging you.
Oh, yeah.
It eats away at you.
Well, yeah, just because I know it'll get my blood pressure down, it'll just be healthier.
Yep. So starting to see some physical effects.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little scary. Sounds like maybe you've even
Yes.
had some high blood pressure readings.
Asthma, a lot of stuff.
Asthma,
with it,
complexity.
yep.
Yeah. So if you were, and it's difficult, but if you are able to get started, you see some really nice health effects that unburden your worry.
Absolutely, yeah.
But confidence is low because you keep starting and sputtering.
Yeah, I'm in grad school right now, and just a lot of commitments, so.
So time overwhelmingly
Oh, yeah.
committed elsewhere.
Right, just the time is just not there.
Seems almost impossible to fit it in.
Impossible would be a very good word, yeah.
So may have to wait until you graduate.
Yeah. I might have to wait till I graduate or maybe the end of the semester. Time starts freeing up a little bit more.
So maybe, just tell me where you are in your education roughly.
I'm getting my graduate degree, second of 3 semesters,
Okay, so you have to go back in the fall or this?
spring, summer.
Okay.
Yep. So at the end of April, it's exponentially easier as far as.
So maybe in as little as a month, there might be time to start again.
Oh, there should be time in a month. I don't see why there couldn't be time. I mean, knowing what I'm getting into. Yeah.
What values did you choose?
I'm spiritual, considerate, and respectful of others.
Okay, spiritual, considerate, and respectful.
Mhm.
What, if any, connection do you see between those values motivating your activity or your activity enhancing those values?
Well, if I'm healthier, with not having get my asthma down, blood pressure, that kind of thing, I think that'll help increase my ability to be more considerate and respectful. As far as because I'm in the helping profession, so
Yeah,
as
to be more
far as-
consistent.
Yeah, with
counselor.
counseling, yeah, maybe just not better counseling per se, but it should eliminate that background noise.
Yeah, it's just an annoyance. I don't like having to feel I'm not walking the walk, literally.
Or just like, oh my god, I need my inhaler right now in the middle of a session. That's just kind of one of those you don't want to break. You want to keep things kind of.
You can't be authentic as much. You can't be in the moment. You have to be
A distraction, yeah.
a very
Yeah,
nice,
big
yeah.
distraction, absolutely.
So let me summarize your story and see if we can just talk for another couple minutes about it.
Sure.
You've been really starting to think about working on your weight, and walking is one logical step.
Yes.
And you've gone so far as to enroll in M Healthy and maybe
Mhm.
some other things, but you
Mhm.
can't get started. You can't start the step counting, and you can't commit to these online self-management things, but you really, really want to,
Yes.
because you see helping. I'm going to be a better counselor.
Right.
I'm going to be healthier. I'm going to have, hopefully, my asthma and my blood pressure will get under control, and I won't be walking around with this worry.
Yeah. Or give that background that I was talking about, that worry.
Yeah.
That'll kind of move that along a bit.
So I'm just curious, given that clearly this is a high priority for you, you're committed to it, insofar as you've actually started,
Yes.
what is your view of what it's going to take to get over that hump? What, besides waiting till the courses, end the semester, what else would it take to get you?
Yeah. So making once I see those time slots opening up, making sure that I'm plugging in exercise.
So making sure you don't use them for other things, or
make sure. Yeah, maybe sit down and do a priority list actually.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy. Wife, kids, family, and pursuing things. It's exercise. Yeah. Maybe I need to get that priority list and put them in number.
yeah, because you have other things besides school that are time.
Right. Yeah. It's easy to. I think maybe it's just easy to kind of forget about exercise.
You know what you just said? I think you said it's so important that I'm willing maybe to have a little less time with my spouse and my kids because it's that important.
Yeah, it is that important because it'll keep me around longer.
Yeah.
So taking that time away might be kind of like an investment.
Yeah.
Future returns would pay off with longevity.
So it sounds like in addition to just getting through this semester towards your degree,
Yeah.
when some time slots start to open is to grab them
Grab them, yes.
and not let other things fill up that void.
Yeah, that'll probably be, I need to be very cognitive of that and just not let,
Yeah.
kind of in the mode of not working out or anything, so being cognitive to make sure that's plugged in.
What comes across loud and clear, Aaron, is that you're really looking forward to the relief of not worrying about this.
Yes.
Not just having it nag at you.
When you get down to at least 40 pounds, that would feel great.
So you even have a goal in mind. You have a number.
I've set goals and I've done, like I said, right at Nate, we put a lot
Yeah,
in there.
so one way to think about it is look at all this failure. Another way people think about that same thing is look how important it is that I keep thinking about it. So
Yeah, it's still there. It's still there, so absolutely.
great. We're gonna stop not because it's not interesting. Only we have 15 minutes. So what we did there in about 5 minutes each is a compressed stage 2 of motivational interviewing. So in case you were wondering what does it sound like, that's what it sounds like. We try to pull change talk and have them talk about it, get them excited, hopefully solve their barriers where possible, not always possible, usually, and just keep the conversation focused on the positive. In the first phase of MI, it's okay here if it's all about the negative and it's all about barriers, but here it's really positive stuff. It's really the reasons for change. It's getting the crescendo of energy towards, yes, I'm going to do this, trying to get that commitment language. Today we don't have time to do this. It's something that you'll have to get in additional workshops from the team. Maybe I'll come back for half a day, or maybe they'll drive you all down to Ann Arbor for a day, and we'll start at 8 o'clock.
I love Ann Arbor.
One quick question, because I want to throw that at you, because I really do feel like it's a possible moment, and I've always wrestled with that with patients. Like, so it is okay that if it's in that moment, kind of identify the time before the change can happen.
Yeah.
Because you affirm that, it wasn't possible at this time, but later on.
Yeah.
So kind of setting that future goal, maybe.
What often happens is very interesting. If you use an amplified negative reflection,
Yeah.
the only way you could do this is to wait 6 months. Sometimes it actually works in a funny way. They'll say, no, I guess I could do something now. So yes, it's good to say, maybe this won't work into the future, but oddly, sometimes it actually makes them say, well, maybe I could do something now.
Okay, good, thank you.
So we're not going to do this today. Hopefully I will talk to Jess and Maureen about making sure you get these skills, but this is action planning. This is setting
We'll go over
goals.
that this afternoon.
But what we've just done, which is really the harder part, honestly, although there is science to this, I actually think it's much easier to teach this. We have tried for a day and a half to first teach you how to just learn to pull their story, and then now very quickly, you didn't get to practice it because of time, but you got to engage in it as patients, a few of you, and observe it for the rest of you. See what it means to try to grab change talk. Ultimately, the flow is this simple. After you get change talk, you summarize and say, okay, where does that leave us? That's the transition to action planning. So we have about 10 minutes together. Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to first get any questions about the last segment of the workshop, because we did it almost without taking a breath. So our entire discussion of change talk, which includes organically reflecting on what's been said, that's the flashlight activity we did. And then we said, let's manufacture it or elicit it or whatever you want to call it. Let's pull it out. Any questions about any of those strategies, either philosophically or procedurally? So when do we use the strengths activity if what's low?
Motivation.
What part of motivation? It has two components.
The one on the right.
Confidence, good. We use that works. Very visual person there. And what on the left is importance, and then we just use values.
So is it appropriate to use EPE, like, so as Aaron was talking, like, for instance, like, if he's saying something that's not accurate, is it appropriate to correct that, or are
Yeah.
you trying to stay focused on?
First of all, what is the thing you were actually referring to in what he said, that what's not accurate?
I mean, it's an opinion that I think it's inaccurate, so I don't know
Which-
if that's appropriate. Like, so it sounds like he's saying the only way to control his weight would be to exercise.
That's a different issue. That's not a factual correction. That is
Right.
tough one. So
Yeah,
So
that's kind of what I'm asking.
yes, clinically, at some point, if we couldn't get him to walk, we would say there might be other areas. But generally, at face value, if they say that's the way, and I would give it a 2-3 weeks if I had a weekly conversation before I would say something else. Because I'm going to assume he's thought about it and walking keeps coming up. Now, if it was factual and he said, I have to walk an hour a day at a heart rate of 180 or I won't lose any weight, that would have to be corrected. So this has to be factual. Otherwise, you're just in the normal MI world of, we call it useful fiction. It doesn't matter. All right, good question though. Other questions about change? So we're going to get to questions about everything in 5 minutes, but are there any other questions about what we just saw in a very compressed way? But I hope you saw the flow. We saw in each case, we very quickly got in what's the problem, what might motivate you, how might you go about this. All right, so now let's go a step sort of higher and say, looking back at the day and a half we spent together, what is your take-home message now? We had some last night at 4 o'clock. Where are you now? What are you excited about? What are you scared about? And also, what would be your elevator speech to a colleague? Laura, you said yesterday, we got to get them all to do this. I want you to repeat why. So what would be your fill in the blank for why do we want to get everyone to do this?
Oh, I was kind of having a mental break there, sorry. So I think everybody should do that, like we said, in the healthcare industries, because I think most people are in a crisis mode when we do take care of them. And I had a different approach to people, and I know that most of my colleagues were kind of getting a little rough around the edges, even the newer nurses, because of the type of clients that we deal with and all of their problems. I think this is a better way of getting them to speak to us and to be more insightful as to why they're in the ER.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of that, I find, is because they put themselves there. It's something they could have prevented.
But you're also realizing telling them that isn't helpful.
And that is exactly what we do wrong. And that's kind of what this just kind of brought me to me.
Become the rudder, not the captain.
Exactly.
Let them hopefully find it themselves.
Exactly.
One of the most powerful benefits of MI has nothing to do with patients. One of the most powerful immediate outcomes is you will feel less resentful of your patients. And therefore you will walk out less cynical. You will walk out less trained because you're not advising them, they're not rejecting your advice. That is a miserable way to live.
Yeah, they do it all the time. It's because we do it wrong.
Yeah.
It's kind of lightning.
Good. So what are your other take-home messages and fears as well as hopes for this? What would you tell your colleagues as to what you just learned? What did you just learn for a day and a half? And don't say motivational interviewing, that would be obnoxious. Lisa, what did you learn in the last day and a half?
How to communicate effectively.
Which includes?
Not being judgmental, being empathetic,
Okay,
people situations.
nice.
I like the distribution of energy that you mentioned before. And then also, and another thing that I learned was the effective listening. I used to think it was just is it reflective listening or
Yeah.
effective listening?
Reflective, yeah.
That's what I used to know before, and it kind of bounces off from there a little bit. So, but this is more broad than that.
Good. Yeah, I mean, we always say, like, who knew there were 7 different types of reflective listening? Like, who knew? Other things you guys learned? Questions you have? How are you going to implement this? Are you going to A, only do it in Maureen and Jessica's study, or B, I'm going to do it everywhere I can?
That would be the
So let's ask it one more time. What for you is the most interesting difference between MI and how either you were or in general healthcare professionals are?
I think the light bulb moment for me was when you talked about the pros and cons and how that's really a crappy way of motivating people.
Yes, it is, isn't it? And why is it a crappy way to motivate people?
I wrote it down. It says because it doesn't set the foundation for long-term change. But I mean, I think about even my own life and my own experiences making pros and cons lists and using that to make important decisions.
Do you agree that they're not effective? Pros and cons charts? I'm curious.
I agree that it's only effective to a certain extent,
Okay.
and it doesn't really, I think, tap into those deep motivations.
And that's why it tends to be less effective. It does give you motivation, but it's sort of a low grade motivation. So another way to say it is these are 10 MI orgasms we hope you had. So these are 10 things we hope you feel you now would agree with. So I'd like you to look at the list and say which of these, yes, I kind of feel that's true.
I think the deeper level reflections are worth the risk really resonated with me.
Okay.
And I kind of took a stab in the dark when we were talking.
Mm-hmm.
And then she started crying and unraveled this whole story that we hadn't really talked at all about. And so while it wasn't necessarily the main topic of what we were talking about, as we started to talk more about that, there was a very clear connection.
I think going off that same thing, kind of how people will share a lot very quickly
Yeah.
if you listen and are empathetic.
That came up yesterday, I think Aaron mentioned it, I forgot who did. Yeah.
It really transcends a lot of cultural stuff too. If you guys don't know, we've been doing this 3 years in the ER, and when UofM was looking at hiring me, I didn't understand why black inner city kids would want to talk to a 35-year-old white guy. I just couldn't see that happening, and I mean with the deeper stuff, and it works. I think over the 3 years I had one kid that you just couldn't crack in a half hour, but sometimes it takes 15 minutes, maybe 20 if they're really tough, but they're usually after 10 minutes so it's kind of a little testimony there with that. So.
Nice.
I like that it gave the patient the opportunity to come to the realization themselves.
Good.
And not
Rather
be
than-
told.
Right. You don't have to be in the role of persuader.
I like seeing the different ways to find the change top. I think that gives me more help.
Okay. So we have sort of shine a light on it, pull on it. So any last questions or comments for me or your team? So the only thing I'll leave you with is we do know that these workshops are good up to a point. They do not give you the automatic reflex. So when you go into the trenches next, if you don't consciously try and do it, it's not deep enough to come out yet. So at this stage of your mastery, you have to consciously say, I'm going to reflect with this patient. I'm going to try the 0 to 10. I'm going to try the values. There is this awkward learning phase where it is not integrated and there's no zen. You're wobbly, it's like, you're self-conscious, but there is no other way around it. Is you have to learn to ride without training wheels. This is riding with training wheels. And so the only thing we know is if you want these skills to solidify, there has to be a conscious effort to say, today I will try this, this, and this. And the one thing we can promise you is it almost only can get easier, not harder. All right? All right, it's not bad for a day and a half. You guys covered a lot of ground. So,
Yeah.
all right.
I